Why are you so heartless? My mama died because this also happened to her and nobody helped fast enough. At 40,000 feet in the air, a little girl named Amara snatched a cup of water from the hands of a flight attendant who had refused to help a choking woman. What happened next changed 3 lives forever. The flight attendant thought she had power. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Stay until the end because this story will restore your faith and courage. Now, before we dive into how an 8-year-old girl became a hero and changed her family's destiny in a single moment, let's rewind a few minutes back. At 40,000 feet above the Pacific, a woman choked. Her fingers wrapped around her throat as her world compressed into a single, desperate need for air. The piece of pretzel lodged in her windpipe wasn't large, but it sat at exactly the wrong angle, sealing off her breath like a cork in a bottle. Her eyes went wide with animal panic as she tried to cough, to force sound, to do anything except sit there dying in seat 7A while 200 passengers pretended not to notice. Someone help her! A man's voice cut through the engine's drone. She's choking. Heads turned. Bodies shifted. Phones came out not to call for help but to record. This was how the world worked now, Margaret thought through the haze of oxygen deprivation. Document first. Act never. She stumbled into the aisle, one hand braced against the seat to keep from collapsing. Her cream Chanel suit, the one she'd worn to close a $40 million deal in Seattle just yesterday, was now rumpled and twisted. Her silver hair, normally swept back in an elegant chignon, fell forward across her face as she bent double, trying desperately to force her diaphragm to expel the obstruction that was killing her. 3 rows back, 8-year-old Amara Lewis watched the woman's struggle with recognition that stabbed through her chest like broken glass. She knew this dance. She'd seen it before in a shopping mall 2 years ago when her mother had collapsed, gasping for air while strangers stepped around them like they were street performers putting on a show. That memory lived in Amara's bones now, a permanent resident in the architecture of who she was becoming. Her small hands gripped the armrest until her knuckles went pale as bone. The sky-blue dress she wore, hand-stitched by her grandmother before the cancer took her, suddenly felt too tight around her chest. Golden stars had been embroidered across the fabric, little points of light meant to guide you when everything went dark. Grandmother had told her that, when you can't see the path, baby girl, you follow the stars. Beside her, Caleb Lewis felt his daughter's tension like electricity in the air between them. He placed one large, calloused hand on her shoulder, a gesture meant to comfort but also to restrain. He knew his child. He knew that look in her eyes, that set to her jaw. She was about to do something, and whatever it was would complicate everything. Daddy! Amara's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a scream. That lady needs help. I see her, baby. Caleb's voice was tight, controlled. The flight attendants will handle it. But even as he said it, both of them watched the blonde flight attendant approach the choking woman with steps so slow she might have been walking through honey. Lydia Moore's face wore an expression that Caleb recognized immediately because he'd seen it 1,000 times in boardrooms and on construction sites and in bank lobbies. It was the look of someone calculating whether a person was worth the effort of basic human decency. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat. Lydia's voice carried that particular pitch of authority that people use when they want you to know they're doing you a favor by acknowledging your existence. You're blocking the aisle. Margaret tried to respond, but no sound came out. Her lips moved around words that had no air to carry them. Both hands were at her throat now, the universal signal of choking, impossible to misinterpret unless you were deliberately choosing not to see. A middle-aged white woman in the row behind Margaret stood up, her voice sharp with disbelief. For God's sake, she's choking. Get her some water. Do the Heimlich. Do something. Lydia turned toward the woman with a smile that never reached her eyes. I'm trained for these situations. Some passengers are simply dramatic. She'll be fine once she calms down. The words landed in the cabin like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples of shocked silence outward. Amara felt something shift inside her chest, a gear clicking into place. She'd heard those words before too, or ones like them. People are just dramatic. They're exaggerating. They want attention. She'd heard them whispered in the hospital waiting room after her mother died. Nurses talking in hushed tones about how those people always made such a fuss about everything. Margaret's knees buckled slightly. Her vision was tunneling now, darkness creeping in from the edges like someone was slowly turning down the lights on the world. Her chest burned with the effort of trying to pull in air through a passage that was completely sealed. Somewhere in the rational part of her brain that was still functioning, she calculated how much longer she had. 2 minutes, maybe 3 before permanent brain damage. 4 or 5 before death. She thought about her company, Caldwell Urban Holdings, the empire she'd built from nothing over 40 years. She thought about the housing developments she'd created in forgotten neighborhoods, bringing dignity and beauty to places everyone else had written off. She thought about her late husband, Thomas, who'd believed in her when banks wouldn't, when investors laughed at a black woman with big dreams and empty pockets. She thought about how ridiculous it was that after surviving poverty and discrimination and every obstacle the world could throw at her, she was going to die choking on a pretzel at 40,000 feet while a flight attendant watched with carefully maintained indifference. Please. The word came from another passenger, an elderly black man in a cardigan who'd been reading the Wall Street Journal. His voice trembled with urgency and something else, something that sounded like recognition. That woman is dying. You need to help her right now. Lydia sighed, a sound of infinite patience tested by unreasonable people. Sir, I need you to remain calm. Creating panic doesn't help anyone. She turned and walked toward the galley with deliberate slowness, her movements conveying that she was addressing the situation but would do so at her own pace, on her own terms, because she was the authority here and these passengers needed to remember that. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to break free. She watched the flight attendants retreating back, watched the woman in the cream suit sink lower toward the floor, watched her father's jaw clench with the same helpless fury she felt coursing through her own small body. This was the moment. This was always the moment when adults decided that getting involved was too risky, too complicated, too likely to cause problems they couldn't afford. We should stay out of it, baby. Caleb's voice was low, meant only for her ears. Sometimes you have to pick your battles. But Amara wasn't listening anymore. She was back in that mall, 8 years old but feeling ancient, watching her mother's face turn purple while shoppers streamed past with their bags and their phones and their carefully averted eyes. She remembered grabbing a woman's arm, begging her to call 911, and the woman had pulled away like Amara's touch might contaminate her. Someone will help, the woman had said, already walking away. I'm sure someone will help. No one had helped. Not in time. By the time the ambulance arrived, her mother was already gone, and Amara had made herself a promise in that hospital corridor with its fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell. She'd promised that if she ever saw someone struggling, someone drowning in plain sight while the world flowed around them, she would not look away. She would not wait for someone else. She would not let another person die alone while everyone pretended not to see. Lydia returned from the galley carrying a plastic cup no bigger than a shot glass, filled maybe a quarter of the way with water. She held it loosely in one hand, her posture radiating boredom and mild annoyance, like a teacher dealing with a student faking sick to get out of class. Here. She didn't move toward Margaret, who was now on her hands and knees in the aisle, her forehead nearly touching the industrial carpet. If she wants water, she can come get it. The cabin erupted, not with action, not yet, but with sound. Gasps and exclamations and whispered profanity. Several passengers stood, their faces twisted with confusion and growing outrage. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Flight attendants were supposed to help. That was their job, their purpose, their entire reason for existing on these flights. What is wrong with you? A young woman with purple streaks in her hair stood up, her phone already recording. She's dying right in front of you. Ma'am, I need you to sit down. Lydia's voice went sharp as a blade. You're interfering with crew operations. Crew operations? The purple-haired woman's voice climbed higher. A woman is choking and you're standing there like she's asking for extra peanuts. Give her the damn water. But Lydia stood her ground, the tiny cup balanced in her palm like evidence in a trial. Her face had taken on a stubborn set, jaw tight, eyes hard. This wasn't about the water anymore, if it ever had been. This was about control, about power, about maintaining the hierarchy that kept her above and them below. She'd been challenged in front of a full cabin, and now it was personal. Margaret's arms gave out. She collapsed fully onto the carpet, her body convulsing with the effort to breathe, to cough, to do anything that might dislodge the blockage slowly killing her. Her chest heaved uselessly. Her fingers scrabbled against the floor like she might claw her way through it to reach air on the other side. Tears and saliva ran down her face, and she couldn't even muster the dignity to care anymore. Death, she realized with crystalline clarity, was seconds away now, not minutes. In the moments before consciousness began to fade, Margaret's mind flashed through her life like photographs shuffling in the wind. She saw herself at 22, standing in front of her first property, a condemned apartment building everyone said was worthless. She saw Thomas proposing on bended knee in that building's newly renovated lobby. She saw the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her first major development, the mayor shaking her hand while photographers captured the moment. She saw herself accepting awards, giving speeches, mentoring young entrepreneurs who looked like her and needed someone to believe in them the way Thomas had believed in her. And she saw herself at 8 years old, sitting with her parents at a lunch counter in Birmingham, waiting to be served while white families came and went around them. She remembered her father's hand on her shoulder, heavy and warm, and his quiet voice saying, "Not today, baby girl. Today we wait our turn, even if our turn never comes." She'd understood even then what he was really saying. Sometimes survival meant swallowing your pride. Sometimes dignity was a luxury you couldn't afford. But the little girl 3 rows back had different ideas about dignity and survival. Quick question: do you believe that one brave child can change everything? Hit that subscribe button right now because Amara's story has just begun. Amara stood up so fast her seatbelt, which she'd already unbuckled with trembling fingers, whipped against the armrest with a metallic snap. Her father's hand shot out to stop her, but she was already moving, her small legs carrying her into the aisle with a speed born of absolute certainty. "Stop!" Caleb's voice followed her, urgent and afraid. "Amara, sit down. Right now." But Amara was running, her blue dress billowing behind her, those embroidered stars seeming to catch the cabin light and glow. She ran past the businessman still filming on his phone. She ran past the elderly man in the cardigan who'd been begging for help. She ran past the purple-haired woman still shouting at the flight attendant. She ran until she stood directly in front of Lydia Moore, all 4 feet and 2 inches of her, staring up at the woman who held a dying person's hope in a plastic cup. "Give me the water." Amara's voice didn't shake. It should have. She was 8 years old, confronting an adult authority figure in front of 200 witnesses, with her father's future and their entire livelihood potentially hanging in the balance. But her voice came out steady and clear, carrying the weight of a promise made beside a hospital bed 2 years ago. Lydia looked down at her, and for just a moment, surprise flickered across her face. Then something harder settled in, something that looked almost like satisfaction. Here was an opportunity to reassert control, to make an example, to show everyone on this plane who made the rules. "Little girl, you need to return to your seat immediately." She bent down, bringing her face level with Amara's. And when she spoke again, her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for the child's ears. "If you don't sit down right now, I'm going to have a very serious conversation with your father about your behavior. Do you want him to get in trouble because you couldn't follow simple instructions?" The threat landed exactly where Lydia intended. Amara felt it like a punch to her stomach, that familiar fear that had governed so much of her short life. Don't make waves. Don't draw attention. Don't give them a reason to notice you, because when they notice you, bad things happen. Her father had drilled this into her not with words but with his own careful navigation through a world that punished people like them for taking up too much space, for demanding too much, for believing they deserved the same consideration as everyone else. She thought about the meetings her father had scheduled in Los Angeles, the investors who represented his last chance to save Lewis Horizon Builders from bankruptcy. She thought about their small apartment back in Redwood City, the photographs of her mother still covering every surface because her father couldn't bear to pack them away. She thought about how hard he worked, how tired he looked at the end of every day, how sometimes she caught him staring at nothing with an expression that made her chest ache. But then she looked past Lydia's shoulder at the woman dying on the floor, at Margaret's body going still in a way that was worse than the convulsions, in a way that meant systems were shutting down, oxygen-starved cells surrendering to the inevitable. And Amara saw her mother's face superimposed over the stranger's, saw the same desperate need for air, the same animal terror, the same loneliness of dying while the world watches and does nothing. "Why are you so heartless? My mama died because this also happened to her and nobody helped fast enough." The words came out of Amara's mouth before she'd consciously decided to speak them. "That mama is dying too, and I'm not gonna let another mama die." She moved before Lydia could react, her small body darting to the side with the agility of childhood. Her hands shot up and closed around the plastic cup, wrapping around Lydia's fingers, pulling with every ounce of strength in her 48-pound frame. The cup came free with a splash of water that hit Lydia's pristine uniform, darkening the navy fabric in spreading spots. "You little—" Lydia's voice came out as a shocked hiss, her professional mask cracking completely to reveal the rage underneath. But Amara was already gone, already dropping to her knees beside Margaret's motionless form. The cup trembled in her small hands, water sloshing dangerously close to the rim, but she held it steady through sheer force of will. Up close, the woman looked even worse than she had from 3 rows back. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, her lips tinged with blue. Her eyes were half open but unfocused, seeing nothing. "Please wake up." Amara's voice cracked on the words. "Please, please wake up. You gotta drink this. You gotta try." She tilted the cup toward Margaret's lips, her hands shaking so badly that water spilled onto the carpet, onto Margaret's suit, onto everything except where it needed to go. Panic rose in Amara's throat like bile. She didn't know what she was doing. She was just a kid, just a little girl with a cup of water and a promise she might not be able to keep. "Let me help." A man's voice, calm and authoritative, came from above her. Amara looked up to see a Latino man in his 40s, wearing jeans and a Redwood City Fire Department t-shirt, kneeling on Margaret's other side. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for a pulse, assessing her airway, his face grave but focused. "I'm a paramedic," he said, more to the crowd than to Amara. "Everyone give us space." "You," he looked at Amara. "You did exactly right getting that water. Now I need you to hold her head steady for me. Can you do that?" Amara nodded, her whole body flooding with relief that someone who knew what they were doing had arrived. She set the cup down carefully and placed her small hands on either side of Margaret's face, feeling the clamminess of the woman's skin, the shallow flutter of muscles still trying desperately to pull in air. The paramedic, whose name tag read Martinez, positioned Margaret's body at an angle, supporting her chest with one hand while he delivered sharp, measured strikes between her shoulder blades with the heel of his other palm. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on. Give it up." The cabin had gone silent except for the engine's constant drone and Martinez's steady count. 1, 2, 3. Each strike was precise, controlled, designed to create just enough force to dislodge the obstruction without causing injury. 4, 5. Nothing happened. Margaret's body remained limp, unresponsive. Martinez adjusted his position, struck again, harder this time. 6, 7. Amara felt tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. This couldn't be happening. She'd grabbed the water. She'd done the thing. She'd broken all her father's rules and risked everything. And it couldn't be for nothing. The universe couldn't be that cruel, could it? To let her save someone just to watch them die anyway? 8. Martinez's voice stayed level, but Amara heard the tension creeping in. He was worried. Even he, with all his training and experience, was worried they were losing this fight. Then, on the 9th strike, Margaret's body convulsed with sudden violence. Her back arched, her throat spasmed, and the piece of pretzel that had been lodged in her windpipe came flying out of her mouth to land on the carpet in a glob of saliva and partially chewed food. The sound that followed was the most beautiful thing Amara had ever heard. A gasp, ragged and desperate, as air rushed into lungs that had been starving for it. Margaret sucked in breath after breath, each one sounding like it hurt, like dragging sandpaper across raw flesh, but each one meaning life, survival, continuation. "That's it." Martinez kept one hand on her back, supporting her as she coughed and gasped and slowly returned to the world of the living. "Easy now. Small breaths. You're okay. You're going to be okay." The cabin erupted in applause and cheers, the collective relief so powerful it felt like a physical force. Strangers were hugging strangers, crying, laughing with the giddy joy of witnessing a near tragedy become a miracle. Phones that had been recording the emergency now captured the aftermath, the moment when death retreated and life won. But Amara didn't hear any of it. She was still kneeling beside Margaret, her small hands still cradling the woman's face, tears still pouring down her cheeks in rivers. Margaret's eyes, which had been vacant and unfocused moments ago, slowly cleared and locked onto Amara's face. Recognition flickered there, then understanding, then something that looked like wonder. "You!" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, her throat raw and damaged. "You're the little girl who wouldn't give up. I promised my mama." Amara's words came out between sobs she could no longer control. "I promised I wouldn't let nobody die if I could help. I promised." If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel. Margaret's hand came up, shaking with exhaustion and trauma, and gently wiped the tears from Amara's cheek. "What's your name, brave girl?" "Amara. Amara Lewis." "Well, Amara Lewis." Margaret's eyes filled with tears of her own. "You saved my life. Do you understand that? You saved my life when everyone else was too afraid or too cruel or too busy to care." Behind them, Caleb had finally reached his daughter, having fought his way through the crowd of standing passengers. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling her into his arms with a force that bordered on desperate. His whole body was shaking, and Amara realized with shock that her father was crying, really crying, in a way she hadn't seen since the funeral. "Don't you ever," his voice broke on the words, "don't you ever scare me like that again." But even as he said it, Caleb was looking at his daughter with something beyond fear, beyond relief. Pride, raw and overwhelming, shone in his eyes alongside the tears. This was his child, this fierce little soul who'd inherited her mother's courage and her grandmother's conviction that right mattered more than safe. He held her tighter, burying his face in her hair that smelled like the coconut oil he'd carefully braided into it that morning. "I had to, Daddy." Amara's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I had to. I know, baby girl. I know." And he did know because he'd felt that same pull his entire life, the magnetic force of knowing what was right and being unable to walk away from it even when walking away would have been smarter, safer, easier. He'd just learned to ignore it more than his daughter had, learned to calculate the cost before acting, and somewhere in that calculation, he'd lost something essential that Amara still possessed. Martinez was helping Margaret sit up against the seats, monitoring her breathing, her color, the way her hands trembled with adrenaline and shock. "You're going to be sore for a few days," he told her. "That kind of trauma to the throat, the chest, it takes time to heal. But you're breathing, and that's what matters." Margaret nodded, unable to speak yet beyond a whisper, but her eyes were scanning the cabin now with new awareness. She saw the passengers still recording on their phones, saw the flight attendant who'd refused to help standing frozen near the galley with water stains spreading across her uniform like accusations. She saw Lydia's face cycling through expressions, shock giving way to something that looked like fear as the woman began to comprehend exactly how bad this looked, how many witnesses there were, how thoroughly documented her cruelty had been. "Where's the captain?" An older white man in a business suit stood up, his voice carrying the boom of someone used to being heard. "Someone needs to get the captain out here right now. This is unacceptable. This woman," he pointed at Lydia, "let a passenger nearly die. She refused to help. I got the whole thing on video." "I have it too," the purple-haired woman called out, holding up her phone. "Every second of it." "So do I." This from a teenage boy in the back. "And me," a middle-aged Asian woman near the front. The voices multiplied, a chorus of witnesses volunteering their evidence, their documentation of what had transpired at 40,000 feet. Lydia's face went from red to white to gray, her professional composure shattering like glass hitting concrete. She took a step backward, then another, her hands coming up in a gesture that might have been defensive or might have been pleading. "I was assessing the situation." Her voice came out high and thin. "I'm trained for emergencies. I was following protocol." "Protocol?" The businessman's face flushed darker. protocol is to let someone choke to death? To threaten a child who was trying to help? That's the protocol. She grabbed company property. Lydia's voice climbed higher, desperation making it shrill. That child assaulted me and destroyed my uniform. You all saw it. The cabin went silent at that, the collective shock so profound it felt like the air pressure had changed. She'd actually said it out loud, actually tried to make herself the victim in a situation where a woman had nearly died and an 8-year-old had saved her. The audacity of it, the sheer disconnection from reality, left people momentarily speechless. Then Caleb stood up, unfolding his full 6'3" frame, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but it carried the weight of every indignity he'd ever swallowed, every insult he'd ignored, every time he'd stayed silent to keep the peace. Don't you dare talk about my daughter that way. Lydia turned to face him, and some primal part of her brain recognized the danger in pushing this man any further. But pride and panic overrode survival instinct. Your daughter is out of control. You people need to teach your children respect for authority. The words dropped into the cabin like a grenade. You people. 2 words that stripped away any remaining ambiguity, any possibility of misunderstanding or benefit of doubt. 2 words that revealed the rotting foundation underneath all the professional courtesy and plausible deniability. 2 words that made explicit what everyone had been sensing throughout the flight but couldn't quite name. Did she just say what I think she said? The purple-haired woman's voice was loud with disbelief. Oh, she said it. The businessman was already typing on his phone. And I got that on video too. Lydia seemed to realize her mistake, her hand flying to her mouth like she could stuff the words back in. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant. We all know exactly what you meant. This came from an unexpected source. An elderly white woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair who'd been sitting quietly in first class. Her voice carried the crisp authority of old money and older power. I've been watching you since we left Redwood City. The way you serve some passengers and ignore others. The smiles you give to certain people and the contempt you show everyone else. I know exactly what you are, young lady, and it's disgusting. The cockpit door opened with a decisive click that cut through the rising chaos. Every head turned toward the front of the plane as a figure emerged, her presence commanding immediate attention. Captain Iris Reyes stood in the doorway, her uniform immaculate, for gold stripes gleaming on her shoulders, her dark eyes sweeping the cabin with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. She was Filipina, in her early 50s, with close-cropped black hair shot through with silver and a face that had clearly seen and navigated every kind of turbulence, both literal and metaphorical. She'd been flying for 32 years, had logged over 20,000 hours in the air, and had developed the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively straighten their posture when she entered a room. I need everyone to remain calm and seated, she said, her voice cutting through the noise with surgical precision. I've been monitoring this situation from the cockpit, and I've seen the videos that several passengers have already forwarded to the crew. I'm aware of everything that's transpired. She walked down the aisle with measured steps, her eyes taking in Margaret still sitting on the floor recovering, Martinez kneeling beside her, Amara clutched in her father's arms, and Lydia standing near the galley looking like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Captain Reyes stopped in front of Margaret, crouching down to bring herself to eye level. Ma'am, are you able to breathe comfortably? Do you need oxygen or any medical intervention beyond what this gentleman has provided? I'm okay. Margaret's voice was still rough, but stronger than it had been. Thanks to him, she nodded at Martinez. And to this little girl who refused to let me die. Captain Reyes looked at Amara for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, a softness appearing around her eyes. What's your name, sweetheart? Amara Lewis, ma'am. Well, Amara Lewis, you did something incredibly brave today. But I need you to sit with your father now while I handle some crew business. Can you do that for me? Amara nodded, and Caleb guided her back toward their seats, though he kept looking over his shoulder, unwilling to let the woman who'd threatened his daughter out of his sight. Captain Reyes stood to her full height and turned to face Lydia. The change in her demeanor was instant and absolute. The warmth that had been there for Amara and Margaret vanished, replaced by something cold and final as a judge's gavel. Lydia Moore, you are suspended from duty effective immediately. If you're loving this video so far, you can subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification for instant notification on our next story. The cabin inhaled collectively, 200 people drawing breath at the same moment. Lydia's face cycled through disbelief, shock, and finally a desperate anger that made her features twist into something ugly and unrecognizable. She opened her mouth to protest, but Captain Reyes held up one hand in a gesture that allowed no argument. I've reviewed the footage from multiple passengers. I've received reports from 3 other flight attendants who witnessed your behavior. I've seen you deny service to specific passengers, refuse emergency assistance to a choking woman, physically grab a minor child, and use language that violates every policy this airline holds sacred. Captain Reyes's voice never rose above conversational volume, but each word landed with the force of a hammer. You are no longer acting in any capacity as a member of this crew. You can't do this. Lydia's voice came out strangled, panicked. I have union protection. I have seniority. 15 years with this airline. You can't just fire me mid-flight because some passengers got emotional about a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Captain Reyes stepped closer, and despite being several inches shorter than Lydia, she seemed to tower over the flight attendant. A woman nearly died. A child had to do your job because you refused. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a failure of basic human decency, and I absolutely can remove you from duty. Watch me. She pulled out her phone, and within seconds, she had someone on the line. This is Captain Reyes on Flight 447. I need security to meet us at the gate. I'm removing a crew member for cause.
Suspension pending termination.
She paused, listening. Yes, I understand the protocol. I'm invoking emergency authority under Section 14 of the Crew Conduct Manual. This is non-negotiable. Lydia was shaking now, her hands trembling as the reality of her situation finally penetrated the fog of denial and self-justification. This is because of them, isn't it? Her voice dropped to a hiss, venom dripping from every syllable. This is political correctness gone insane. That child assaulted me, and I'm the one being punished. That child saved a life while you stood by with a cup of water and let a woman suffocate. Captain Reyes's voice went even quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. And the fact that you still can't see what you did wrong, that you're standing here trying to make yourself the victim, tells me everything I need to know about who you are. She turned to 2 other flight attendants who'd been hovering nearby, both of them looking shaken and pale. Escort her to the rear galley. She's to have no further contact with passengers. If she attempts to leave that area or speak to anyone, you call me immediately. Understood. Yes, Captain. They moved forward, flanking Lydia like guards escorting a prisoner. Lydia looked around the cabin wildly, searching for allies, for someone who might support her version of events. But every face she met looked back with expressions ranging from disgust to pity to satisfaction. The businessman was still filming. The purple-haired woman had her phone up, capturing every moment. Even the passengers who might have been sympathetic to a flight attendant dealing with a difficult situation couldn't find it in themselves to defend what they'd witnessed. "This isn't over." Lydia's voice shook as the flight attendants began to guide her toward the back. "My lawyer will have a field day with this. Wrongful termination. Discrimination. I'll own this airline when I'm done." If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel. Your lawyer is welcome to contact our legal department. Captain Reyes's tone suggested she wasn't particularly worried about that possibility. In the meantime, you're relieved of duty. As Lydia was led away, the cabin remained silent. It was the silence of justice being served, of consequences finally catching up to cruelty, of the universe briefly bending toward fairness in a way it so rarely did. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. Just one person at first, then another, until the entire cabin was applauding. Some people standing, some crying, all of them united in this moment of collective relief and validation. Captain Reyes held up her hands, quieting the applause. "I want to apologize to everyone on behalf of this airline. What you witnessed today was unacceptable, and it does not reflect our values or our commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect." She turned toward Margaret, who was now sitting in her seat with Martinez monitoring her vital signs. "Ma'am, I cannot adequately express how sorry I am for what you experienced. You deserved better. You deserved immediate assistance, and instead, you were subjected to cruelty that nearly cost you your life." Margaret nodded, too emotional to speak. Tears tracked down her cheeks, cutting through the makeup she'd applied so carefully that morning when she'd been a different person, when she hadn't yet come face to face with her own mortality. Captain Reyes looked at Amara next, and her stern expression softened into something warm and genuine. "And you, young lady, what you did today took more courage than most adults will ever show in their entire lives. You saw someone who needed help, and you didn't let fear or authority or consequences stop you from doing what was right. That's heroism in its purest form." She addressed the whole cabin again. "We'll be landing in Pacific Harbor in approximately 90 minutes. Airport security will meet us at the gate to escort the removed crew member off the aircraft. If anyone wishes to provide a formal statement about what occurred, please see me or any of the remaining flight attendants. We take these incidents seriously, and your testimony will be invaluable." She returned to the cockpit, but the atmosphere in the cabin had fundamentally shifted. Passengers who'd been strangers were now talking, sharing their shock and relief, exchanging phone numbers to stay in touch about this shared experience. The elderly man in the cardigan who'd begged Lydia for help made his way to Caleb's row, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your daughter is something special," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been on this earth 74 years, and I've seen a lot of ugliness. But I've also seen moments of pure goodness, and what she did today, that was pure goodness. You should be proud." "I am." Caleb's arm tightened around Amara. "I'm terrified and proud and angry and grateful all at the same time. That's fatherhood." The old man smiled, feeling everything at once and hoping you're doing right by them. He looked at Amara. "Sweetheart, you reminded this old man that there's still hope in the world. Thank you for that." Margaret had recovered enough to stand now, though Martinez stayed close, ready to catch her if she wavered. She made her way slowly down the aisle toward Amara's seat, each step careful and measured. When she reached them, She lowered herself into the empty seat across the aisle, her movements stiff with residual pain and exhaustion. "I need to know your names," she said, looking between Caleb and Amara. "Your full names. Because what happened today changed my life, and I want to remember exactly who saved it." "Caleb Lewis. This is my daughter, Amara." "Amara." Margaret repeated the name like she was committing it to memory, filing it away in a place where important things lived. "That's beautiful. What does it mean?" "My mama said it means grace." Amara's voice was small again now that the adrenaline was fading. "She said I was born during a storm, but when I came out, everything went peaceful, like grace arriving." Margaret's eyes glistened with fresh tears. "Your mama was right. You brought grace today when everything was chaos. You brought light when things went dark." She paused, seeming to gather herself. "Can you tell me about her?" "Your mama." Amara looked up at her father, seeking permission. Caleb nodded, his hand gentle on her shoulder, and she began to speak in halting sentences about the woman who'd raised her for 6 short years. She told Margaret about her mother's laugh, how it could fill a whole room and make strangers smile without knowing why. She told her about Sunday mornings making pancakes shaped like animals, about bedtime stories that always ended with the hero being brave even when they were scared. And then, with her voice dropping to barely a whisper, she told Margaret about that day in the mall. "She was buying me shoes for school," Amara said, staring at her hands. "Red ones with sparkles. I was trying them on, and she was laughing because they were too big, and then she just stopped laughing. Her face got weird, and she couldn't breathe right. She fell down and people just kept walking. Some of them looked, but they kept walking." Caleb's jaw clenched, the memory still raw after 2 years. He'd been at a job site 40 minutes away when he got the call. By the time he'd broken every traffic law to reach the hospital, his wife was already gone, and his daughter was sitting in a chair too big for her, still wearing one red sparkly shoe, the other lost somewhere in the chaos. "I screamed for help," Amara continued. "I grabbed people's hands and begged them to call 911, but they pulled away like I was bad or dirty or something. Finally, someone called, but it took so long. The ambulance came, but it was too late. The doctors said if someone had helped right away, if someone had done CPR or something, maybe she would have made it." Margaret reached across the aisle and took Amara's small hand in both of hers. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. That should never have happened to you or your mama. That's why I couldn't let you die too." Amara's tears came faster now. "I kept seeing her face on yours, and I kept thinking about all those people who walked past, and I just couldn't be one of those people. I couldn't. And you weren't." Margaret squeezed her hand gently. "You were exactly who your mama raised you to be. Brave and good and unwilling to look away when someone needed you." She looked up at Caleb. "You're raising her right. In a world that teaches us to mind our business and protect ourselves first, you've raised a child who still believes in helping others. That's remarkable." Caleb felt something crack open in his chest, some barrier he'd been maintaining since his wife died. "I try. Some days I feel like I'm failing completely. Today, watching her run into danger, I was terrified. Still am. But I'm also seeing her mother in her so clearly it hurts." "What do you do, Mr. Lewis?" Margaret's question seemed casual, but there was an intensity in her gaze that suggested the answer mattered more than small talk would warrant. "I own a construction company, Lewis Horizon Builders. We specialize in sustainable residential and light commercial development." He hesitated, then added, "Or at least we used to. Business has been tough lately, I'm actually heading to Pacific Harbor for some investor meetings. Last-ditch effort to keep the company alive. Margaret sat back, something shifting in her expression. A calculation happening behind her eyes, pieces fitting together in ways Caleb couldn't see yet. Tell me about your approach to sustainable development. It was an odd time for a business conversation, here in the aftermath of a near-death experience, but something in Margaret's tone suggested this mattered. So Caleb answered honestly. He told her about his philosophy that buildings should serve communities, not just generate profit. He described projects he'd completed in Redwood City, affordable housing developments that incorporated green spaces and energy-efficient design without cutting corners on quality. He talked about his struggle to compete against larger firms with better connections and deeper pockets. The proposals I submit are solid, he said. My safety record is impeccable. My costs are competitive. But somehow the contracts always go to someone else. Someone who knows someone. Someone with the right last name or the right golf club membership. He stopped himself, realizing he was veering into bitterness. Sorry. You don't need to hear all this. Actually, I do. Margaret leaned forward. Mr. Lewis, what would you say if I told you that I might be able to help with your business troubles? Caleb blinked, confused. That's kind of you. But I don't think there's much anyone can do at this point, unless you happen to know investors looking to fund sustainable construction in the Pacific Harbor area. A smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth, the first real smile since she'd started breathing again. Mr. Lewis, I don't know investors. I am an investor.
I'm Margaret Caldwell.
I own Caldwell Urban Holdings. The name hit Caleb like a physical blow. Caldwell Urban Holdings was legendary in the development world. A company that had transformed struggling neighborhoods into thriving communities across 12 states. They were known for projects that balanced profitability with social responsibility, for investing in areas other developers ignored, for building with integrity even when cutting corners would have been easier and more lucrative. You're Margaret Caldwell. He said it like he was testing whether the words were real. The Margaret Caldwell. The one and only. Her smile widened. And as it happens, I've been searching for a construction partner for a major project in Pacific Harbor. Mixed-use development, affordable housing component, sustainable design throughout. The kind of project that requires a builder who actually cares about getting it right, not just getting it done cheap and fast. Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain was struggling to process what was happening, the impossible coincidence of it, the sheer unlikelihood that his daughter's act of courage had connected him with exactly the person he needed to save his company. I'm serious, Margaret continued. I've been interviewing contractors for 6 months. Big firms, mostly. Impressive portfolios, slick presentations, promises they have no intention of keeping. I've been getting frustrated because I can't find anyone who actually shares my values, who understands that these projects are about people, not just profit margins. She gestured between herself and Amara. Your daughter just showed me your values in action. She risked everything to help a stranger because it was the right thing to do. That tells me more about the kind of man you are, the kind of company you run, than any portfolio presentation ever could. I don't know what to say. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. This is I never expected. Say you'll meet with me tomorrow. Margaret pulled a business card from her purse, her movements still slightly shaky. 9 o'clock. My Pacific Harbor office. Bring your portfolio, your proposals, your vision for what sustainable development should look like. I want to hear everything. Caleb took the card with trembling fingers. It was heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of card that announced you'd made it before you'd even spoken a word. Margaret Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Urban Holdings. A downtown Pacific Harbor address that probably meant a corner office with a view. "I'll be there." He managed to get the words out past the lump in his throat. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't charity, Mr. Lewis. If your work is as good as I suspect it is based on what I'm seeing in your daughter, then I'm getting the better end of this deal. If you've watched till this point, you can like and subscribe to this channel." The remainder of the flight passed in a strange haze of relief and anticipation. Passengers kept approaching Amara, asking to take photos with her, telling her she was brave, that she'd restored their faith in humanity. The purple-haired woman, whose name turned out to be Riley, sat with them for 20 minutes sharing stories about her own activism work and telling Amara she was the kind of person the world desperately needed. "You didn't calculate whether it was safe or convenient or politically smart," Riley said. "You just saw someone hurting and acted. That's pure moral courage, kiddo. Don't ever lose that." The businessman who'd been so vocal about documenting everything introduced himself as David Chun, a civil rights attorney from Pacific Harbor. He handed Caleb his card. "If there's any blowback from this, any attempt by the airline to retaliate or intimidate, you call me immediately. What your daughter did was heroic, and I'll make sure nobody tries to punish her for it." Even the elderly white woman from first class made her way back to their seats. She was Margaret's age, impeccably dressed in what Caleb recognized as designer clothing that cost more than his monthly mortgage. "I'm Patricia Worthington," she said, extending her hand. "I sit on the board of 3 nonprofits in Pacific Harbor, and I'd like to invite your daughter to speak at our youth leadership conference next month. We need young people to see what real courage looks like." Amara handled it all with a mixture of shyness and growing confidence, her small hand gripping her father's whenever the attention became overwhelming. She was still just 8 years old, still a child who'd rather be reading her chapter book or drawing pictures of butterflies than being the center of adult attention. But she was also beginning to understand that what she'd done mattered beyond the immediate act of saving one life. When the plane began its descent into Pacific Harbor, Captain Reyes's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach. I want to thank you all for your patience and understanding during today's emergency. I especially want to acknowledge young Amara Lewis, whose bravery saved a life and reminded all of us what it means to put others first. Amara, if you're listening, you're an inspiration." The cabin erupted in applause again, and this time Amara allowed herself to smile, really smile. The kind of smile that lit up her whole face and made her look exactly like the carefree 8-year-old she should have been all along. The landing was smooth, Captain Reyes's decades of experience evident in the gentle touchdown. But instead of taxiing directly to the gate, the plane pulled into a remote area of the tarmac. Through the windows, passengers could see 3 airport security vehicles and what looked like news vans, their satellite dishes extended toward the sky. "How did the media find out already?" Caleb muttered. "Social media." Margaret gestured to the phones still out throughout the cabin. Riley's live stream had over 2 million viewers by the time we hit cruising altitude. This story is already everywhere. Captain Reyes emerged from the cockpit as the plane came to a complete stop. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Airport security will be boarding to handle an administrative matter." The aircraft door opened, and 4 security officers entered, their faces professionally neutral. They walked directly to the rear galley where Lydia had been confined for the past 90 minutes. There was a brief, muffled conversation, and then they emerged with Lydia between them. She looked nothing like the confident flight attendant who'd boarded in Redwood City. Her hair had come completely loose from its bun, hanging in limp strands around her face. Her makeup was smeared from crying. Her uniform was wrinkled and stained. But more than her physical appearance, it was her demeanor that had transformed. She walked with her shoulders hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor, the absolute defeat of someone who'd finally comprehended the magnitude of her mistakes. As the security team escorted her past the rows of seats, the cabin fell into complete silence. No one applauded this time. No one jeered or celebrated. They just watched with the solemn awareness that they were witnessing consequences, real and permanent, for cruelty that had nearly proven fatal. Lydia didn't look up, didn't try to defend herself or plead her case. She just kept walking toward a future that had been destroyed by her own choices, by years of small cruelties that had finally culminated in one massive failure of basic humanity. When she'd been removed and the aircraft door closed again, the plane taxied to the gate in silence. Passengers gathered their belongings with unusual quietness, the weight of everything they'd witnessed still heavy in the air. Captain Reyes announced that Amara and her father would be deplaning first, at Margaret's request. Ms. Caldwell has arranged for you to bypass the media circus outside, she explained. Though if you want to speak to reporters, that's entirely your choice. Caleb looked at his daughter, who shook her head vigorously. I just want to go to the hotel, Daddy.
I'm tired.
Then that's what we'll do. Margaret walked with them to the gate, moving slowly but steadily. Martinez had cleared her medically but recommended she see a doctor within 24 hours for a thorough examination. She'd agreed, but first she had something to take care of. In the jetway, away from cameras and crowds, Margaret knelt down to Amara's level one more time. I meant what I said about tomorrow. Your father and I have business to discuss. But I also want you to know that you've given me a gift today, Amara. You've reminded me why I do what I do, why I built my company, why I keep fighting even when it's hard. You've shown me that integrity still exists, that courage still matters, that one person really can make a difference. She pulled a small velvet box from her purse and opened it to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a star. This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me when I was about your age, and she told me that stars shine brightest in the darkest times. You were a star today, sweetheart. You were light in darkness. I want you to have this to remember that you have that light inside you always. Amara's eyes went wide as Margaret fastened the bracelet around her small wrist. The star charm caught the fluorescent light and gleamed, looking remarkably like the stars embroidered on her blue dress. Thank you, Amara whispered. I'll keep it forever. I know you will. Margaret stood, turning to Caleb. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be late. I won't be. I promise. They parted ways at the gate, Margaret heading toward a private car service she'd arranged, Caleb and Amara making their way through the airport toward baggage claim. Word of what had happened had spread through the terminal, and airport employees stopped them every few feet to shake Amara's hand, to tell her she was amazing, to snap photos that would be shared across social media within minutes. By the time they reached their hotel room that evening, the story had exploded across every platform. News outlets were running headlines like, 8-year-old hero saves woman's life after flight attendant refuses to help, and viral video shows child's courage when authority fails. The video footage had been viewed over 50 million times. Civil rights organizations were using it as an example of systemic discrimination. Aviation industry watchdogs were demanding policy changes. And Lydia Moore's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Her LinkedIn profile had been deactivated. Her social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments ranging from angry to devastating. Multiple airlines had already added her to industry-wide do not hire lists. Her career in aviation was over, her reputation destroyed, her future fundamentally altered by 15 minutes of cruelty captured from multiple angles and shared with the world. But in a hotel room in Pacific Harbor, Caleb Lewis sat on the edge of a bed watching his daughter sleep, the silver bracelet gleaming on her small wrist, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since her mother died. Tomorrow he would meet with Margaret Caldwell and potentially save his company. Tomorrow the media attention would intensify. Tomorrow there would be interviews and questions and decisions to make about how public they wanted to be. But tonight, he just sat with his sleeping daughter and marveled at her courage, her conviction, her absolute refusal to let fear dictate her actions when someone needed help. She'd risked everything today, not knowing there would be rewards, not calculating the potential benefits, just acting because her heart and her promise to her mother demanded it. If you believe the world needs more people like Amara Lewis, people who refuse to look away when someone needs help, subscribe to this channel because these are the stories that change us. The morning news would report that Lewis Horizon Builders had secured a $15 million contract with Caldwell Urban Holdings, the first phase of a partnership that would eventually grow into something transformative for both companies. They would report that Lydia Moore had been terminated and would likely face civil lawsuits from multiple parties. They would report that airlines across the country were implementing new training protocols and accountability measures. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was simpler than any headline could capture. At 40,000 feet in the air, an 8-year-old girl in a dress covered with hand-stitched stars had looked at injustice and suffering and decided that doing nothing was not an option. She'd grabbed a cup of water and changed the trajectory of 3 lives forever. She'd proven that courage doesn't require size or age or authority, just the willingness to act when the moment demands it. She'd shown 200 passengers and 50 million viewers that one person, even a very small person, can make all the difference in the world. And as Caleb Lewis watched his daughter sleep, the star charm on her wrist catching the light from the window, he understood with perfect clarity that his wife's grace had lived on in their child, that Amara would carry that light forward into a world that desperately needed it, and that sometimes the greatest legacy we leave isn't measured in buildings or businesses or bank accounts, but in the courage we pass down to the next generation.